Though it had been bubbling under for 18 months, the end of 1976 was when UK punk got its first 7 inches. The Sex Pistols' Anarchy in the UK may have generated the most outrage, but the Damned's New Rose got there first. While they may have fired the first shot, the Damned ran counter to many of the key tenets of punk. Their songs dealt with the personal rather than the political. They didn't instantly disregard all music before 1976, and they could actually play their instruments. They were outcasts, set adrift by the punk powers that be, yet one of the most vital and interesting bands of the era. This is New British Canon, and this is the story of New Rose. The Damned were birthed from the incestuous London scene, immediately before the breakthrough of punk. The Sex Pistols had gained Johnny Rotten and their name sometime in 1975, and started playing shows under the watchful Svengaliship of alternative fashion merchant Malcolm McLaren. His friend and rival fashion shop owner Bernard Rhodes wanted his own similar band to mould, and set about making something happen, with guitarists Mick Jones, Tony James, and Brian Robertson, resulting in the dubiously named London SS. The catalysing moment for the band was when Rhodes invited them to see the Sex Pistols for the first time. Just seeing them playing made me, Mick and Tony aware that there was other people into this kind of music. They were playing the Stooges no fun. No fun, my babe, no fun. They weren't the greatest band in the world, but they had an attitude. They were barking up the right tree. It made you think, I wasn't wrong, there is people out there into this stuff. Needing a drummer, the band put a want ad in the back of Melody Maker, with the prerequisite that applicants must be aware of the current New York scene. What you know is trash. Pick it up, take them lights away. Oh yeah, now little Johnny Jew. And MC5 through to the Stooges. Problem was that in 1975, very few people in London, including Rhodes who'd placed the ad, had actually heard this music. Releases from New York being limited, and international distribution almost non-existent. Our entire knowledge of New York punk had come from Punk magazine. No one had seen the Heartbreakers live, but we thought they looked great. We had seen pictures of Television, Richard Hell, and Blondie, but nobody had heard anything. Blagging the phone interview, a shabby overcoated Chris Miller, with messy hair and an unfortunate skin condition, found himself in a basement, ready to impress the disinterested, TV-distracted musicians of London SS. Through the combined happenstance of a rat running across the basement floor, Miller's constant scratching, and the band's general disdain for their potential drummers, Miller was rechristened Rat Scabies. His appearance put off the more style-conscious Jones and James, but Robertson instantly saw a drummer with whom he could see a future. He played like a fucking maniac. There was this war film on the TV, fighter planes in a dogfight, and suddenly all this action was coming from the kit, everything shooting off in all directions. They said he doesn't look very rock and roll. I said I don't give a fuck what he looks like. Did you hear what he just did? However, London SS never found a suitable frontman, and soon fell apart without ever playing any gigs. Its members going on to bigger and better things. Jones would hook up with 101ers singer Joe Strummer and form The Clash. And James met Billy Idol and created Generation X. After some time playing in the similarly short-lived Masters of the Backside with a Pre-Pretenders Chrissie Hynde, and the Subterraneans with NME writer Nick Kent, Robertson and Scabies would join up with Johnny Moped's Ray Burns as bass player to form their own group. They took their name from the Visconti-directed Nazi historical drama, The Damned. With his deep rockabilly croon, Masters of the Backside's David Lett would take the frontman position. The band were auditioning for a singer, and I went early to check out the guy before me, but he never turned up. Turned out it was Sid Vicious. Could he have become the singer in The Damned rather than the bass player in the Sex Pistols? We'll never know. Just as Chris Miller became Rat Scabies, Brian Robertson became Brian James. The surname was inspired by his admiration of the two Jameses in the Stooges, Williamson and Osterberg, aka Iggy Pop. Vocalist Lett had a more macabre pseudonym in mind. I remember Dave saying, "I'll be Dave Vanian," as in Transil. This name change was hammered home by his adoption of a B-movie vampire persona, inspired in part by 30s German expressionist cinema. Dark coal eyes, white makeup, second-hand tuxedos, ending up as a Dracula Casanova, or maybe even a Gene Vincent Price. And like that, The Damned were complete.
1, 2, 3, go!
Now a fully formed group with ambition to last more than a couple of weeks, it was time for The Damned to make themselves known in the London scene. Their first gig was on the 6th of July 1976, supporting the Sex Pistols at the 100 Club. The Clash, under Bernard Rhodes' management, had consciously made their debut 2 days earlier, also supporting the Sex Pistols in Sheffield, beating their fellow London SS compatriots to the punch. While this was happening, the Ramones came for their first UK shows. The New York four-piece supported the Flaming Groovies at the Roundhouse in front of a 2,000-strong crowd on the 4th of July, and headlined at Dingwalls with support from Talking Heads and the Stranglers the following day. Attending those shows were key faces from the Adverts, Banshees, Clash, Pistols, Subway Sect, and of course The Damned, duly revolutionised by the group's blitzkrieg bops.
Hey, oh, let's go! Hey, oh, let's go! Hey, oh, let's go!
When the Ramones came over, that was a bit of revelation. Everyone sped up after that Dingwalls gig. But this movement of speedy, attitude-heavy, back-to-basics British rock and roll needed a name. McLaren pushed for New Wave, which was adopted to some extent. But by August 1976, the press had agreed that this was punk. Not that all the bands concurred with the verbiage. The word punk didn't mean a thing to me. It was defamatory, worthless, no value, an insult. As soon as somebody said it, I remember as Melody Maker writer Caroline Coon, it became "This is punk rock." It's like saying I'm into shit rock. It's pretty funny now, but I didn't see the irony then. Playing around London, their carefree attitude and playful antics while delivering their pummeling, double-time MC5 inspired tunes made them stand out. But by their 6th show, The Damned became the sole representatives of UK punk at the first European punk rock festival in Mont-de-Marsan in the south of France, making them the first UK punk band to play internationally. On the 2-day coach drive down, The Damned were joined by the cream of British pub rock, Eddie and the Hot Rods,
I got the teenage depression, that's what I'm talking about. If you don't know what I mean, then you better look out, look out.
Nick Lowe,
But where it's going, no one knows. So it goes, so it goes, so it goes, so it goes.
and Dux Deluxe.
I'm going coast to coast, and the guitar making goes.
The Damned boys would amuse themselves with childish pranks, flinging petty insults and eggs at their travel companions, culminating in Scabies tearing an Eddie Cochran t-shirt right off Lowe's back, mid-interview, for the crime of referring to his power pop as rock and roll. At the actual festival, the Damned set was ramshackle at best, Lowe telling John Ingram that they were the worst group he'd seen since the Sex Pistols. But this bizarre jaunt would be valuable. For one, bassist Ray Burns got a genius AKA after pretending to be a pilot on the coach and riling up an unimpressed Sean Tyler of Dux Deluxe, who shouted, "Oi, Captain Sensible, get that egg out of your hair before customs, or I'll stick your head down the bog and wash it for you." Despite their immature hijinks, they also bagged a manager in Dave Robinson, and a record deal thanks to Stiff Records' Jake Riviera. We liked Jake, and the whole Stiff Records thing made a lot of sense. So we signed. We had heard about Jake before the Mont-de-Marsan festival, about this bloke who was really on the case. When we talked to him about MC5 guitarist Wayne Kramer, he knew who we were talking about. He was hip to what was going on, even with his cowboy boots. On September 21st, the Damned played the second night of the infamous 100 Club Punk Festival. bumped from the first night by the machinations of McLaren, fearful that the Damned might be pulling focus from his pet project. The second night, having neither the Sex Pistols nor Clash, was headlined by Manchester's Buzzcocks, joined by the Vibrators and France's Stinky Toys. Unfortunately, the Damned set was overshadowed by Sid Vicious, lobbing a pint glass at the stage, shattering and showering the front row with glass. Some poor girl lost an eye because of that wanker. It was the people standing either side of him who persuaded him to do it. They were to blame. Sid was impressionable and gullible. He wanted people to be impressed by what he did. He was quite weak-willed, really. The incident made the national press and enforced in the public consciousness that punk bands, their crowds, and especially the Damned, were violent and dangerous. Many venues stopped putting on punk shows. However, by this point, the Damned had already recorded their debut single. Not about anarchy or riots, but from the outside at least, about a girl. New Rose had been gestating for a while, James having written the basis for the track while part of his pre-London SS group, Bastard. I was in Brussels in late '74, and I had this riff nagging at me. I played it with the drummer from Bastard, a guy called Nobby Goff, and he just didn't get it. He didn't set fire to it like he needed to. It was in limbo for a while, kinda like a homeless riff. It wasn't until he played the riff to Scabies that everything changed. Jamming together, they bashed out the structure, tied down by Scabies' Burundi-style beat. Its live debut also predates the formation of the Damned, being played as the Subterraneans as early as May 1976. When Riviera approached them about recording a single, most of the Damned agreed that New Rose was the obvious choice.
I've got a new rose, I've got a good. Yes, I knew that I always would.
Captain Sensible, though, preferred I Fall, feeling it was even faster and would have had more shock value. It was recorded at Parkway Studios, a box of a room in North London. I remember singing in the hallway because there was too much of the music coming into my microphone. I had to sing out there with the door shut, and it was still very loud because everything was full volume. There was barely enough room for the band when we recorded it, but it was a fantastic experience. Produced by Stiff labelmate and Mont de Marsan travel buddy, Nick Lowe, it took a mere 4 hours to lay down a mix, costing Stiff only £46. The master copy was even recorded over an early Elvis Costello demo in a further attempt to cut costs, but this threadbare recording process only added to the track's in-your-face sound.
See the sun it shines. Don't get too close or it'll burn your eyes.
People say, blimey, you can't hear much production on it, and that's the fucking point. There's no production on it. That was the genius of Nick Lowe. He could see that you didn't need to do a big production job on The Damned. It sounds raw and rancid and gnarled. To spruce it up would have been a mistake. The choice of New Rose as their debut further marked The Damned apart from the other bands in the scene. Rather than a political screed or a call to arms, theirs was a song about an exciting new romance.
I can't stop to mess around. I got a brand new rose in town.
Emphasised by the song's opening line,
Is she really going out with him?
which was cribbed wholesale from the Shangri-La's Leader of the Pack.
Is she really going out with him?
Despite this, James insisted that the romance wasn't with a person. Everyone thinks New Rose is about a girl or a new relationship, but it's not. It was about this emerging scene, this lovely buzz that you never dreamed could possibly happen. It was like I got my own swinging 60s, that sort of vibe.
I got a feeling inside of me. It's kinda strange, like a stormy sea.
Many saw this emerging scene as a year zero, a burning of all that came before, but not The Damned. They weren't just going to forget about the classics. Hammering that home, New Rose's B-side was a double-time cover of The Beatles' Help, revised by the tempos present on the Ramones' debut.
Help me if you can, I'm feeling down.
Help me if you can, I'm feeling down. And I do appreciate you coming round.
It's funny because there was that was then, this is now feeling. And there was us blasting away on an old Beatles song. It was pretty fast. It suited the title of the song. It was desperate. New Rose would be released on the 22nd of October 1976 and is seen as the first UK punk single, being released 5 weeks before the Sex Pistols' Anarchy in the UK. This would be additional spit in the eye for Malcolm McLaren. While he was finagling a major label deal for the Pistols, the Damned snuck one out via an independent. Everyone wanted to be the preeminent punk group, especially the managers. They had this dreadful rivalry. The bands got on, but the managers were all sneering at each other. It was quite funny, really. New Rose never charted, but it still sold well, forecasting a wind of change for British rock music. Way faster than the post-Faces plod of the Pistols, it was primal, energetic, and fun. The most vital, life-affirming nugget of rock and roll goodness since the mod era. Even outside the punk underground, the track had its share of old guard appreciators. Led Zeppelin's Robert Plant and John Bonham showed up to Damned gigs, while T-Rex's Mark Bolan lovingly reviewed the single and Melody Maker. The energy level is dynamite. The attitude is positive rather than moody positive. It has the same feel as the Stones' I Wanna Be Your Man. You have to sit up and take notice. After scoring the UK's first punk single, the Damned furthered their preeminence by being booked as the support for the Flaming Groovies' November 1976 UK tour. But after their 100 club headlines, a majority of the crowd was there to hear New Rose in its natural setting. Headliners, the Flaming Groovies, had musically evolved beyond their raucous, grimy rock and roll of early singles like Slow Death. To the more Beatle-indebted power pop of Shake Some Action. Which didn't help matters. As such, the two camps were philosophically at odds. They were scared as hell. They didn't like us, didn't like the audience. They didn't like what was going on in Britain at the time. When we walked through their dressing room, they used to cower. It was weird. The Damned lasted 2 dates before the fear got the best of the headliners, and they were booted from the bill. The Groovies claiming them to be the worst musicians we've ever played with. Their next attempt to ply their wares to Britain at large was on the Anarchy in the UK tour. The Damned were begrudgingly booked to play by McLaren, as means to drum up ticket sales, at the time being a bigger draw than the Pistols, the Clash, or openers, the Heartbreakers. But by the time the tour rolled around, the Pistols had made themselves infamous by appearing on the Bill Grundy Show and saying some very naughty words on primetime television.
Go on, you've got another 5 seconds. Say something outrageous.
You dirty bastard.
Go on, again.
You dirty fucker.
What a clever boy.
What a fucking rotter.
Well, that's it for tonight.
The fact that the Damned were increasingly outsiders in the punk scene didn't help matters. Fun rather than political, and with their multiple links to the uncool pub rock scene. The tour started on the 3rd of December, and straight away encountered promoters nervous of letting the sweary Pistols play. We turn up somewhere like Manchester to find the gigs cancelled, but they still want us. Fuck it, we'll do it. What are we meant to do? Say, oh no, we're not doing it. Not if our mate Malcolm's not doing it. You know what I mean? I could have fucking killed that bastard. 4 days in and the Damned were kicked off the tour by McLaren, who labelled them punk traitors and sellouts for being willing to play the cancelled shows. In reality, McLaren no longer needed the Damned to pull an audience, and found any excuse to get rid of them. No matter the truth, the punk traitor label would stick, smearing the Damned's credibility with the safety pin crowd. Unfazed, over December the Damned went back to Pathway Studios to record their debut album. We recorded a whole album, Damn Damn Damned, in 2 days flat. In those days there was never much food around. We were fueled by amphetamine sulfate and cider. Again working with Nick Lowe, The album session spawned the relentless Getaway theme, Neat Neat Neat, which would become their second single. That was the track where I thought we had something really different. I always thought it had a really good groove, with a snaky bass line. It's kinda slippery. Dare I say it, it's a proper piece of music. Again beating other punk bands to the punch, Damn Damn Damned was released in January 1977, making it the first UK punk LP. While the cover depicted the Damn Boys post-pie fight, as a marketing gimmick, the first pressing had a band photo of Eddie and the Hot Rods on the back cover, with a note alerting listeners to the error to ensure its value with collectors. Over the next 12 months, as well as a tour supporting Mark Bolan, the band would continue to rack up their share of punk rock firsts. First charting album, first US tour, first second album, and ultimately the first band to break up. While the Sex Pistols would famously fall apart midway through their US tour, Johnny Rotten quitting at the end of January 1978. The Damned would collapse as soon as September 77. The intense schedule plus an over-reliance on alcohol made it so that Scabies would call it quits after a show in France. Rat did the longest drum solo we'd ever heard him do, went back to the hotel, downed a couple of bottles of brandy, then tried to build a campfire in his room. Next thing, he's broken down in tears saying he can't do it anymore. Though they limped on for a few more months with replacement drummer John Moss, later of Culture Club, the Damned would quickly lose motivation and be no more by the beginning of 1978.
Ladies and gentlemen, how do?
However, that was not the end of the Damned. Though they would play some shows as The Doomed with Lemmy on bass in 1978, the band would return properly without James, with 1979's Machine Gun Etiquette. While Captain Sensible would move from bass to guitar, James's domination over songwriting was replaced with a more collaborative process. Not only would the album's first single, Love Song, be the band's first charting single, barging its way to number 20 in the UK, but it would be a key influence on the hardcore punk movement.
These songs are gospel in many ways to me.
Its second single, Smash It Up, would even be banned by the BBC for fear of inciting property damage. It is also one of the few UK punk releases mentioned in NoFX's vinyl collection Love Song, We Got Two Jealous Agains.
I knew you were the one when I saw Machine Gun Etiquette.
As the 1980s began, more and more groups were taking cosmetic tips from Vanian and producing dark, moody, atmospheric music. Parallel to this, the Damned got darker in tone, more theatrical, with a greater emphasis on psychedelia, haunted synths, and Vanian's deep, dark baritone. On 1980's The Black Album, they were almost as goth as they were punk. A sonic shift that would continue on for the rest of the 80s. As a counterpoint to the moodiness that was being injected into their music, Captain Sensible scored an unexpected solo #1 single in 1982 with his cover of Happy Talk from South Pacific.
Happy talk, keep talking, happy talk.
Happy talk, keep talking, happy talk.
Now an unlikely pop star, the Captain would leave the group in 1984, allowing the Damned to make a full transition to gothic rock on 1985's Phantasmagoria. The next year, the band would achieve their biggest hit ever with a grandiose cover of Barry Ryan's Eloise.
Eloise, baby, Eloise.
A cover that Vanian had wanted to do since 1980, climbing to number 3. The Damned have been playing together on and off ever since, in varying forms, depending on who's fallen out with who on any given year. They even reformed their classic 1976 configuration in October 2022 for only the second time in 45 years. And that is the version that had the biggest impact on music. Not only in small ways like Joe Jackson stealing New Row's already stolen first line for the title of his debut single.
Is she really going out with him?
Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode taking his whole deal from Vanian, or Guns N' Roses' regrettable cover of New Rose. But also in more major ways, like the many bands riffing on their proto-pop-punk sound, frantic, caffeinated, and with a taste for the personal, rather than the political. The template for The Replacements, Husker Du, Nirvana, Bad Religion, Green Day, The Offspring, Rancid, AFI, The Hives, Libertines, and My Chemical Romance. The Damned may have had a whole career after New Rose, but it boldly stands as their most essential moment. A buzzsaw blitzkrieg that perfectly encapsulated the high-energy heart rush of punk's encroaching musical revolution. It signalled that there was a brand new sound in town. Thanks for watching. So I'm back. What was planned as a 2-week holiday became something else entirely. Either way, I got a lot of reading done. Firstly, I'd like to thank all my top tier patrons I've accumulated over the last 2 months. Tommy Gish, CT Taylor, MGP, Mira, Dawn Marie Curran, Daniel Newfield, Brian Cooksley, Adrian Nunez, and an extra big shout out to Merlin Mann. Thanks also to everyone else that supports me. Hopefully I should be back in 2 weeks, but who knows. Let's take it from the top.